So let's go. Let's review what we did then yesterday. So what we were doing is we were still working on this screen, right? And the idea was that this screen, just to kind of put it in a big picture, where's our big picture? The idea was that this screen, it was gonna take user input and make a web call, web service call, and update the cloud, right? And we said one of the problems is that this may take a while to execute, right? Because it is a network call, it's subject to all the network latency, all that kind of stuff. So we said, you know, what we should do is we should put it on a separate thread, right? So one way to do it is just to use a standard Java threading. And remember when I said, you know, what's the difference between Android Java and standard Java? I said, you know, for the most part it's the same, other than UI set of libraries and some additional stuff is new. So the way you do threading in Android is the same way you do threading in Java. However, the problem was that one thread updating other threads UI, right? And the problem with that, you know, yeah, synchronization. You can do it yourself, but you would just have to, you know, wait on one thread and notify the other. You would have to implement that back and forth yourself. So instead of doing that, alternative way was to use something called an async task. And so an async task was basically a separate class. So you were asking about generics. So this is sort of the Java generics. It's not a very typical way of using it, but it is what it is. So this is basically saying we're making it an async task of string, string, string. Okay, what does that mean? So that means that we have basically three main components to an async task. There's do something in a background, and this first string means what we're gonna give it to do in a background is gonna be a string. You know, you could have given it, like my other example is like I do an example with the Fibonacci sequence. So the job in that case is a number. Do Fibonacci of 33, right? That's a number. In this case, it's do a post to Twitter of status. So it's a piece of text, right? So the background, the long-running job goes into here, okay? So this is the job that needs to be done. Whatever the result of that job is the result, which in this case it's a string, right? So that's what we're returning, which refers to the third parameter here. Okay, so...
How do you know that the result refers to a third parameter?
You're just gonna, the way you know it is by looking in the documentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That is how it is supposed to be.
Yes. So in this case, the third parameter is what's going to go into as the input. So the output of the job. So this is the background job, right? Doing background. The output of that job becomes the input of on post execute. So that's kind of, so this basically happens on a separate thread. When it's done, gives us the result, and then we do something with that result. And in this case, we update the UI. This was updating the UI essentially, right?
So is it like a standard thing that to extend something from basic task you have is doing background?
Yes, yeah. So that's the part of the that's by subclassing async task you must implement those methods. Just like, you know, by subclassing activity you have to do this. By subclassing service you have to do that. You notice that is a pretty common approach to programming in Android, right? So you subclass something and then you override the default behavior. And again, you know, the source to documentation was basically to look at here, and you would just type async, bam, there's async task, and I usually use this as a reference. Like here's an example how to do a background download, for instance. So if you don't remember, don't try to memorize this, but just kind of like, oh, okay, that's how it's done. And those generic types that it's asking you, that's what it is. So params, progress, result. That's what those three things is. That in our case was simply...
Progress, there's nothing to do in our case of progress.
Yeah, we just made it up. Maybe, I don't know what, or yeah, we could have made something else for progress. So for example, I might have had percentage for progress. So then I would make this integer, and I would then implement that method for progress. And the quickest way to implement methods would be to go source, override, implement methods, and see it knows what's available. So there's the on progress update, and it knows that it's an integer. and basically just bam, just drops it in for you. And then you could do something, you know, update percentage, right?
So typically, do you do a close to show the progress, or is there a progress bar object that we can type into?
And there is a progress bar, and yeah. So, but it really depends on the usage. Like in this case, it's not like a file download where I know it's 100 megs and I know we're 50% done, right? The problem with this particular case is that I don't really know, I don't really have information about the progress. So like you're sitting on a network waiting, short of actually examining the TCP/IP stack and saying, okay, we have a handshake, okay, we have open socket, we have this, we can have that, right? So that's why in this example it wasn't really conducive to using the progress bar. Yeah.
No, my question was on a general usage basis. What do you do on progress? Is that just like you typically call back a progress and say, okay, 3 out of 10 done, 4 out of 10 done, or do you have like a bar? If there's a bar, is there an object that you can call from there, or is it something you depend on?
Yeah. So let me. So it's a great question, and to answer that question, let me introduce you to another tool you guys should be aware of. As part of each platform, you get sample code. Okay, so sample code, you might not have downloaded it. If you haven't, then you would go into available packages, Android repository, right, and then you would find something to do with samples. So if you have Android 8, you would download Android 8 samples, right?
Start again.
Remember this tool? This is the Android tool.
Oh.
You can double click on Android in your tools directory, or you can click on the little guy here, right? Right. So whichever way you prefer. So if I click on this guy here, that's how we created AVDs, right, and all that. Okay. So if I click on now, see I already have samples for version 8 installed, right? So once you install the samples, what you would do is you would go File, New Android Project. Okay, you guys can do this if you want. So File, New Android Project, and now what you need to do is you say Create Project from existing samples. Okay, but you gotta pick a target, and then it's got a list of all various samples that you can pick a project from, right? So just use the API demos and click Finish. I already have it, so that's why it's not allowing me to do it again. But go ahead. Do you guys have samples installed?
Should it show up in install packages?
If it's installed, it should show up in install package. If it's not, then it shows in the available packages.
So what does it show up as again? Sorry, I missed that.
So it's going to be called install package samples for SDK API something. So for example,
so it's different from the documentation, right?
Yes, it's different than documentation. Yes, yes. So documentation will just, and what this does is basically, here's what happens behind the scenes. In your SDK, samples creates samples folder, whereas documentation creates documentation folder, right? And documentation folder is essentially just the offline version of this website, d.android.com. Right, so you have all the references and stuff online. That makes sense if you're not on slow connection or something, but there's no reason why not to use just directly the website as well if you have internet.
Also, do you think you'll have some time to cover how it's best to read documentation?
Yeah.
And it's been a while for me since I read JavaDoc. So,
Okay.
If you, a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'll point out how to use. Yeah, that's what we were just talking about, async task, how you would kind of like use this as an example. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if it doesn't show up in available or install packages, how do I download the sample code?
If it doesn't show in available,
No, I just say update all.
it should show in available packages. If it doesn't, then you're not talking to the right repository or something. Click on refresh to see why it's not, but it should be showing in the available packages. Otherwise, there's a network issue. Do you see it now?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Okay, so once you guys have samples, right, you gotta have samples, and that equates to having a samples directory here, right? Once you have that directory, that's all the samples, right? Just pulls it down, downloads all that code. Should be reasonably quick, I believe. Then you can add samples by doing File, New Android Project, selecting the target, right, and then saying create project from existing samples, and then adding the API demos. Right. So once you do that, you click on Finish, and you should have API demos as a demo. Okay. I believe I pre-installed it on a virtual machine. So if anybody's doing virtual machine approach, I think I already have it installed. So either way, you click on Run, and it runs that sample application on your emulator. And so as it starts, I'll explain why it's useful. Okay, so this is a sample application, right? So what this is basically a the kitchen sink of various API things that are available to you as an Android application developer. Okay, so here's why it's useful. This corresponds to the actual Java packages. So it dovetails into your question about documentation, right? So if you wanted to know, for example, various views, like you were asking earlier about progress bar. Well, I would think, this is how I would think. I would be like, what's available in terms of progress bars, right? Because there's zillion and one widget, and we're not going to cover zillion and one widget, and it's not our goal to cover zillion and one widget. But our goal is to explain to you how you would go about figuring it out, yeah? So you would be like, a widget is a view, right? Everything is a view. Okay, so let's look under views. Okay, and then you'll be like, oh, look, there's stuff on animation, on autocomplete, on buttons, and chronometer, controls, custom, date widget, expandable list, focus gallery, grid, image view, layouts, list, progress. Ah, look, progress bars. Bam. Okay, so let's see. Oh, there's incremental progress bar, smooth, dialogues, in title bar. Okay, let's see incremental. Okay, so this one, oh, okay, this one works like that. There's a primary and secondary. Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, so maybe not what I want, but let me see what else is available. Oh, this one is, oh, this is the smooth one, right? Okay. Oh, okay, that one just keeps spinning. Maybe that's the one that we want in this case, right? Dialogue, show this one. Okay, so please wait while loading. Okay, cool. That's neat. And then show in the progress bar, please wait while loading, right? That's kind of cool too, right? And then in title bar, there's toggle, and then there's this one, right? So both are pretty good. So like if I wanted to now figure out how to use one of these, right? And this is the same for all zillion and one widget. So what I would do is I would figure out, okay, let's look at the source. But where would we look? There are two components to look, right? There's the XML, right? And then there's the Java. So I would start with XML, and I mean, don't get confronted with zillion and one option. We're looking for a layout, right? That's So I would look for a layout and see the naming. They named it properly. So it's something to do with a progress bar. Progress bar. Let's see what we find. Progress bar 1, 2, 3, 4. That probably roughly corresponds to 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's say we were, for example, interested in, let's say, dialogues. This one, right? So let's say that's a progress bar 3. So I would look at that to see how they did it, because I never used it. I have no idea, right? So okay, so this is the button. Let's see what's in the source code. Okay, there's just a button and just start something. So that's a button. There's really not telling me much. Okay, I kind of hit the dead end with this. Let's look at the Java now. So I would go into source, and then let's see how the packages are organized. Oh, okay, so this is roughly corresponding to the stuff we saw at the first level, right? So there's a views, okay, and let's see if there's something to do. Seems like they're named properly, so let's see if there's something named after. Aha, progress bar 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we were looking at 3. So let's see. Okay, so this is how they do it. They have a progress dialog, and then they have on buttons they say show dialog, right? And then on create dialog, they do something with the dialog, and then that's it. Okay. Okay, so if I wanted to now, like I've never used this one before, but let's see. Can we now copy this idea? So they use something called so it looks like they use something called progress dialog, right? They then on a button say show dialog. Where does show dialog come from? So show dialog is part of the activity, so it's a built-in method, right? Okay, and you just give it a dialog key, and the dialog key looks like it's just some kind of ID. It's made up ID. We can do 99 is a good number, right? Doesn't really matter. And then on create dialog is called. Let's see, how does this work? So on create dialog is called one of those methods that you implement. Looks like sort of on create options menu, right? It's probably one of those callbacks. All right. So let's think about this. If we want it in our.
How does it know that that button was a dialog again? Missing that link up. So on the XML it was just a button.
Yeah. So we find the button.
Okay.
Yeah, find the button, and on click we say this is an anonymous inner class, right? Like.
So that's where you're actually linking the button to the dialog. That's my question.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So so here's what I would do in our case. So bam, I would go to the start. I would say progress dialog, and I would say posting dialog, something like that, right? Organize imports to import progress dialog. Okay, and so now it seems like I need that integer, so that constant. So static final int dialog ID, and you just come up with the number 47. It doesn't really matter, right? So okay, so let's see what else they did. So they did that. So that's static ID. That's the dialog, and then we just need to at some point say show dialog for that ID. Okay, so if I go here, when do I want to show the dialog? I want to show it when we start our job, right? So let's see.
Before post to Twitter, or just after post.
Okay, we can we can do it right here. I can say I can control space show dialog, and then the ID is going to be the dialog that we have. What was my ID? It was dialog 47. Right, I made up some number, right? Okay, so that's a show dialog, and then at some point you also want to do stop. Like that's probably opposite of show dialog, and I have no idea what it is, right? But when do we want to execute it? Well, we would want to execute it after we're done updating the UI. So that would be on post execute, right? So I would say control space, and then let's see what's available to us that's opposite of show. Dismiss dialog. How about that? That looks dismiss the dialog that was previously shown by a show dialog. Bam.
So before the toast, maybe, right? Toast is already saying it's done.
Sure, I can do it before the toast. So to answer your question about the documentation, in the past I would use the website for the documentation more, but if you're using Eclipse, you know, just the fact that you can do control space and then kind of like look through the list, it tends to be quicker to find stuff. Okay. But that just dovetails to the same documentation that's available in here d.android.com, right? So I could have alternatively gone into activity, because all that stuff is part of the activity, and then look, Control F and search for show dialog, and there it is, and kind of found it this way, right? That would be an alternative. But Eclipse kind of brings this, couple of keystrokes closer. Okay, so you want to do this before, fine. And it looks like the only other thing that's missing is this method on create dialog, because that's how it dovetails into that ID, right? So we need to create this method. Now I could copy paste it from this example, or I can go in here and say, okay, we need this method for dialog stuff. So where's my menu stuff, button stuff? I'll put something here that says dialog stuff. And so what I could do is I could do source override implement methods, and then find something to do with on create dialog. Bam, there it is, right? So I could do it like this. Okay, except it puts it right here. So I'm gonna cut it from here and move it one up. On dialog stuff, bam, right? And so it gets an ID, and let's see, what are we supposed to return? It doesn't really tell me here, so I'm going to refer to this. So we're supposed to return dialog. Oh, okay. So what we do is on progress dialog, new dialog this, set title. I mean, I could copy paste this if I wanted, or I can even, copy paste something like this at this point. Bam. And then so this is wrong, so we're not gonna return this, so we're gonna switch on the ID. So if the ID is that ID that we have, which is dialog ID, right, 47, so in case it's that ID, then we're gonna create a new dialog for this context, create some kind of title, right, posting to Twitter, right? Please wait while posting, right? True, cancelable, true, return dialog, and then I think I need one more of these, and then I reformat it so everything looks nice, and that's it. And alternatively, if nothing else happens, return null, meaning we have some other dialog that needs to be created. So, so that's that. So I would also, at this point, I would actually look at a little bit of a documentation for the dialogue, because, for example, I don't like that this is hard-coded in English here, right? So, I mean, we could do, yesterday we talked about how you could do get string resources and blah, blah, blah. But let's say maybe dialogue is already aware of the resources, because sometimes some API actually knows of resource IDs, so it's much easier, like Toast did, right? So it's easier to work with. So at this point I would be, okay, progress dialog. Okay, let's see. Progress dialog. Oops, wrong search box. Progress dialog there. And let's see. Dialog showing progress, blah, blah, blah. Oh, look, you can pass it a theme. Okay, and so it says title message. So set title, let's see. Set title and set message. So we're not seeing set title and set message. Why is that? No, it probably comes from somewhere else up in the chain, right? So this shows you only progress dialog, but doesn't show you everything that's inherited from. So for example, there's something called alert dialog, right? So alert dialog has set message and set title, right? For instance. And it seems like it's only a character. So in this case, it's not aware of the integer IDs. So, we could deal with that. But for now, let me just test if this is working and see what happens. So testing dialog. So if I click on update, so posting to Twitter, please wait, updated, bam. It's exactly what we wanted, right? So yeah, so that's basically an example of how that worked. And we used the one with the, so basically the point was I used the API demos as the kitchen sink of all zillion and one widget that you may want to experiment with. And then knowing that that widget is implemented by two things, XML and Java, you quickly look up XML and Java. And basically you copy it from that, right? So For example, I didn't really see. I wanted one without a title actually, so because that's a little cleaner. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change this to for message. I'm going to just I'm just gonna use the message. Okay, because that's how the other one worked, right? And now I could actually define to be proper. I could define the message in a string, right? And I sort of have to do it manually, but it's a good little repetition. So just like we did here, there was another aha message. So just quickly, I can do it like this if you guys want. So click new string, and I would say MSG. Please wait while posting, and I would say please wait while posting to something like that. Save it, and now back to my status activity. As opposed to doing this, I would say get control space. This dot get string. So I'm inside of dialog. That's why this doesn't work, right? So I would need to go outside to the previous class, so status activity. That's correct. Dot get dot this dot get string, and then resource would be r dot string dot one of those message, please wait while loading, and then you would do Control Shift F to reformat it, and there you go. So it's kind of proper, right?
So if the set title and all, they don't take integers, that means we have to hide them or just not use them.
The what?
If there is a task like this, like set title or something, which is implemented in some parent class, and if it doesn't take integers, that means we cannot use this assignments, right?
Yeah, you would have to then convert. You would have to use get string to so get string that is part of activity basically converts a ID. So you give it ID, which is an integer, and it gives you back the string, localized string. So it is a little bit of extra work. It's the proper way of doing it. But sometimes some people like they just don't care about that. They just want quick and dirty, this and that. So making it work in multiple languages is a tiny bit of extra work, but that's sort of the cost of having wider audience. So it's not that bad. So my job is to kind of show you stuff to do super properly, right? I'm gonna get yelled at if I do too many shortcuts like that. So yeah.
So can we use other frameworks in Java like Spring, something like that?
Can you use other frameworks like Spring? So Spring would not be applicable in this case. I mean, you can use every Java framework. It's just that Spring is really designed to implement MVC pattern and so forth and so forth. So the answer is yes, but particularly Spring would not be that that applicable. Maybe parts of Spring, because you don't have to use the whole thing with Spring. However, I think there's going to be a need for more frameworks, like higher level frameworks. There are certain things that are, in my mind, annoying in Java, in Android, because we have to do manual binding from like UI all the way to the database, and it ends up just being a lot of repetitive typing. And I think that there's an opportunity to reward you for being consistent. Because a lot of frameworks are by convention. So if you stick to certain naming convention, you get rewarded because things get automatically done for you. So I think there's an opportunity for frameworks like that. But at the same time, we're not quite there yet. It took us with Java, like 7 years to get frameworks like Struts first and Spring and so on. So it's coming, right? But it's a good observation. Yeah.
My question was like, if you load such frameworks, I guess more in the way balancing. So would it work on Android properly?
If you load yeah, if you load such frameworks, it is memory intensive. That's a possible concern. Yeah. You know, for example, when it comes to mobile stuff, like you may want to use a different database, right? We're going to talk about databases, I think, today. Well, so for example, one database that ships with Android is the SQLite database, which is a SQL database. But you may be like, you know what? SQL is dead. Like, I don't like SQL, right? So old school, right? So you may want to use something newer, like JavaDB or MongoDB, which are the modern sort of equivalents, right? And in that case, you would use another framework and another set of libraries and so forth. A friend of mine actually develops he has a company around creating a MongoDB-based set of framework that would be ideal for Android, because you just say object save yourself, and you don't care if it's saved locally on the phone or magically went online to the Amazon cloud and saved itself. Maybe it's doing both, but it's doing it intelligently. So that kind of stuff is really cool. MongoLab. Well, it's based on MongoDB, but his company is MongoLabs. Yeah, he actually there's a talk that he did on this on Maracana TV. I'll just point you. So he present. So this is him. So learn how to build mobile backend with MongoDB. So that's part 1 and part 2. So these two. So that's if you want to learn more about that, and I think it's free. I think you go to Mongo Labs. Let's see. So that's a cloud-based, this. And so the way it works is you create a database online. So this is my timeline database, for example, right? You create your database online, and then you have a set of libraries, and you can just bang plug it into, So it becomes just a URL base. So that's how I log in to Mongo, and I can then use. You can't really see it very well, but. It becomes sort of save yourself, read yourself, and it's based on the cloud. So it's a cloud-powered database. It's kind of cool concept. So MongoLab, you can check it out. Cool. So that's just a little bit of a new stuff on Dialog. But it's very similar in a way to menus. So just to kind of review what we did yesterday, other than the async task, which we just did, what we did is we defined menus. So we wanted to basically be able to click on this little thing here and have this thing pop up here, the menu, right? And to do that, what we did is we we looked at how it's done. And basically, it boiled down to a couple of things. We had to define the menu first, right? So menu XML, which was pretty straightforward. It was basically, just like any XML file, you start by clicking on that button or saying file new Android XML file, right? We've done it many times so far. So you clicked on that, you got the little, the little thing popped up, and you said menu, and you typed in menu XML and hit enter, right? And you got this file, and we added one item. And so menu consists of menu items, right? Each button is going to be an item, right? And I said, yes, there's a zillion things you can configure, but in reality, what you care about is the ID, right? Some kind of title, because we got to know what the text we're clicking on, right? And some kind of icon. Now, icon and title were optional, right? Like, you don't have to have an icon, but it's highly recommended.
If you don't have an icon, what will show up?
It's going to be a box, yeah, and then you're going to be like, okay, I have a button which says nothing on it. So left button is this, right button is that. You don't know, right? But you would need to know ID so that you can say, hey, was left clicked or right was clicked, right? So once we had that, we and one reason why I tossed in the icon was because I wanted to show you, hey, there's system resources. It's not just your pictures that you Googled. There's also a way to get pictures from the system, right? So that's what we that's why we did icons. And once you define this XML file, which ultimately it looks like this, right? It's just a piece of XML. We need to inflate it. XML is always useless by itself, right? There's always a process of converting that XML into Java. Ultimately, it's Java, right? We're augmenting Java with XML. So ultimately, something needs to parse this and do something with it. So what we did in status activity is we created a method that said on create options menu. It's just somebody came up with that method. It's kind of like written in stone, right? It's an override method. And then we got a menu inflator, and we inflated from that resource into the menu object. So ultimately, this got quote-unquote returned. It didn't get returned, but it's by reference, right? And then when the menu item gets clicked, when any item gets clicked, you get information about that item. So first we ask ourselves, well, what's the ID of that item? Then based on that ID, we do something, right? And that something that we did was to start an activity. So to start an activity, you say start an activity for an intent. Okay, so this was the first introduction to sort of, we talked, about intents theoretically, but this is the first time we kind of look at intents more in a, in a real sort of scenario. So this is how you create a new intent, right? One of the ways. There's going to be another way which we're going to see later on. But then what do you do with an intent? So an intent just says, oh, I have an intent, but then you got to somehow send it. And there are only a handful of ways you can send an intent. You can say start activity, stop service, broadcast an intent. There's a couple. That's about 4 or 5 ways you can do it. So this is one of the simplest, most commonly used probably ways. Start an activity. So that signals to the system that you would like to have an activity started. And at some point, system is going to start the activity. And then that's where system sort of decides. Remember we talked about the life cycle of an activity. This is sort of where the system decides, okay, somebody wants an activity started, but maybe it's already running. Maybe it's already stopped. So if it's if that's the case, then it's going to come this way. If this is the case, never been run before, it's going to come this way. So that's why it's up to the system then to figure out fastest way to get it up on the screen.
Also, the whole back button implementation, the framework gave it to us, right?
Yeah.
So we never had to take care of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically how that works.
But I think you can customize that, right? There must be something I can implement to.
Yeah, there are some callbacks that get called when the back button is actually pressed. So yeah, there is some things you can do.
So here, like all the methods are public except onStop, right? onStop is protected.
Is what?
All the methods here are public, but only onStop is protected.
I mean, this one is protected. Do you guys get the difference between protected and in terms of visibility in Java? Public means everyone can call it, and protected means only the subclasses and so on. But in this case, it doesn't really matter. Protected is just as fine. So
onStop will also be public.
yeah, we could make it public as well. It's not going to change anything. So cool. So that's where we left it off yesterday.
So when you do the on create options menu, are you actually overriding the menu button? Like if it was another activity, when you click on menu, it goes to the default menu?
No, so are you overriding? So each activity is going to have its own options menu. So see, this is the one for this activity. If I go to the home screen, it's going to be a different implementation of that options menu.
So if you never implemented it, when you click on menu, what will happen?
Just nothing. Just nothing happens. Right? That's what we had earlier. So let's go. Let's, for example, see.
So if you were to change any phone settings, you always have to go to home screen and then click on.
Well, you need to, not necessarily, you need to go into settings application. If you already have it running, I could, for example, long press this and then go to settings directly. but there's a settings application. You need to somehow start it. Right.
Menu is like a menu for that particular activity.
Yeah. Yeah. You can think of it as a right click on Windows or Mac, right? Like, so it just in certain context it means certain things. Like, so for example, if I go to, so see, in status activity I have preference menu, but if I go now to preferences and I click on menu, nada, because we didn't implement it, which is fine because I don't expect user to go from here. It's kind of like user typically expects to hit the back button. Yeah.
On the preference activity, just the one before this,
Uh-huh.
you save, for example, your username, password, and so I'm sure you covered this, but is it stored in XML format or is it?
Yeah. Yeah, which is a great question actually, because we are just about to talk about that stuff. So where you guys? So yeah, so we do have. Look, if I go menu and preferences and I look at my username, it's stored. I did this yesterday. Wow, memorized. Even if I shut it down and restart it, it's gonna be stored. So where's this data? You tell me. What do you think this data is?
There's one of the things that Android's taking care of for you.
So SD card. Okay, sorry.
Oh yeah, I guess in a user data. maybe
Okay, user data. Yeah. Any other ideas? You said XML. So it's actually it's yeah. So it's in user data partition in an XML format, right? So so remember, just a refresher. Yesterday we talked about the file system. And sorry, I'll get back to your question. But this was the user data partition. We said all the user data is stored here, and we said one of the most important places was data, which is a private spot for each app. So each app has its own private data folder. And now if I go in there and look, there's Yamba, Calm Arcana Yamba, right? And so if I open it, look, there's a folder called shared prefs. So this folder here, that's a short list. There's only like 5-6 different things you can have. So if you click on it, there's my shared preferences.
So is it readable?
Yeah, but so I would need to pull it and then show you. Or a faster way for me would be to ADB shell, cd data com Maracana Yamba, right? ls, cd shared prefs, ls, that's the file.
Yeah.
Oh, everything is skewed a little bit. Okay, cat star, bam, there's my username and password in clear text.
What for a cake?
That's a good question. So, you know, this is where like security folks usually freak out. They're like, whoa, time out. You're keeping like username and password like in clear text. I'm like, yeah, is that a big deal? Because keep in mind, this, let me do ls-l. Yeah, it's owned by, this is owned by my specific user and group. In other words, it's not world readable, right? So in reality, unless I was a super user, I would not be able to do this. So if I plug in just for fun my my phone that I said is just a vanilla phone, that you know, it's just a standard Android, and let's say I found it on a street, and I wanted to, you know, it's like, you know, it's kind of equivalent of you losing your laptop, leaving it at Denny's or something, and somebody finds your laptop and says, let's see what's on it, right? They can't log in, right? But they can poke around the file system, right? They can yank out the hard drive, connect it to their PC, right? So let's do the equivalent of that. So now there's my HTC, and there's my file system. Aha! Woohoo! Oh. It doesn't show you anything, right? So I can poke around the SD card, that's world readable, and I can poke around the system, big deal. But data is actually, I can't see anything. Let me show you differently. So if I do, if I open up a new terminal and I say adb-d for device, right? Shell. Okay, I'm connected to my phone. ls/data. Permission denied. Right?
Why did it say that again?
Because I don't have root privileges on that device. Right. So I am on.
Earlier when you plugged it in, your Eclipse knew it was a device and it was able to send the application to it, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you can, because the user allowed that on the phone. The user said allow USB debugging, this and that. Remember?
Ah.
But it still doesn't allow you to poke around. Yeah.
So during the iPhone, days, they're still on obviously, but when the phone was jailbroken, right? So Apple at some point had set a root password, which got around like very fast. These guys done the same thing. They set a root password that somebody could actually get.
It doesn't work that way. There's actually no there is no user. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the password file. There isn't a password file. There's actually a C code that sets up user IDs. It's a totally different way user mechanism works.
There's no way to see the data.
Well, you could get the access to root access to it, but that would require you to change stuff on system image, which is read only. So that's the catch 22 right there. But people do it, and they do it by breaking into the secondary bootloader, which can load the recovery image. So you can basically have a spooky recovery image, then stop the boot, have the system recover from a different image, and then that way you change on that new image usernames and passwords and all that stuff. So it's been done. But it's not simply like, oh, I don't know the password.
Well, they actually had a root password.
Yeah.
You just do SU and then put in that root password.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I cannot check the file system on any device?
well, on a regular device, you cannot poke. You do not have permissions to look at the /data partition. Yeah.
Then writing to
Yeah. Because
You flash out the OS from the device. That's if you don't have a permission. It's easy to
yeah, you can do that. You can create a new operating system and reflash it. Yes. And then on the new operating system, you would have the root privileges. Yes, that's exactly.
On either is if you remove out the SD card, and you put with the image machine, really? Or
Yes, you can. And SD card for the most part is well readable anyhow. So even simpler, I can just connect the phone and here's everything. You can see my music and stuff like that, right? So, yeah. Cool. So now that we know where the username and password is stored, you can see that there's just a file here, and that it's plain text, right? So you saw that that's what username and password. How do we read this username and password? Because that's where we left it off yesterday, right? We said it's for now our username and password is still hard-coded somewhere. It's still hard-coded somewhere, right? So we still hard-code all this stuff. So how do we read it from another place? Yeah, there's actually there's something called shared preferences. Okay, and when I saw the name of that, it first freaked me out. I'm like, what do you mean I'm storing my username and password in some shared preferences? Whoa, I don't want to share this, right? This is mine. But share doesn't mean you're sharing it with the world. It means you're sharing it within your application, or more specifically, context, right? So for us, that is this picture. So we're saying shared preferences is something that we're sharing application-wide, right? So anyone in this realm can access it. Make sense? Which is exactly what we want. So I could do something like this: shared preferences, prefs is, and then get, and then status activity. You don't have to do this because we're gonna rip it out. Get def. Let's see. Get shared preferences Sorry, no, it's not. It's not like that. It's well, let me just look it up. So it's default share preference. So just it's one of those like super long names.
So far, even though we were updating the preference with our username password, it was still using the one like learning Android user ID and password, right? Like,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So basically, get default. Hold on. Default. Um,
the preference manager.
yeah, preference manager. Get default share preference. There, that's where it is. And then context, and the context is going to be this, or more specifically, it's going to be status activity dot this. So and again, I said don't do this because I'll rip it apart. Let me kind of make this bigger so you can see. So organize imports. To import this status activity, you need to spell it properly, and reformat it like that. So this gives me access to the standard shared preferences, right? So you ask preference manager to get the standard shared preference for this context. Okay. Now, if I wanted to get username and password, I would do something like this. String username would be prefs.getString, and then it's simply what key are you looking for? And remember, we had the key as username, right? That was the key that we stored stuff under. Okay, and then you can have a default one, like in case that one is not found. And then string password would be prefs.getString, and then same key was password. That's how we stored it, and you can kind of see that as well here. This is our key, right? Key value, right? Right.
You didn't put URL with it?
It's not here because I didn't enter it. Right. So if I want, look, check it out. So if I go here and enter it, http:// android.status.net/API, click OK, and do here and see what's in there. So cat star, look, it magically is now saved. See how it does all that for you, right? That's the nice part about the support that we have. Okay, so this would have worked, and now I could do something like username, password, okay, and then server, and then for server I would need also to figure out the server, and that would be string server, and then same thing, prefs.getString, and then server, and then default value, which you can come up with something or nothing, right? Or maybe default would be Twitter, right? You could say by default go to, I think it's like this, http://api.twitter.com, I think. Anyway, we could do this, and the reason why I did it here is it shows you the entire job all on one page, right? So you get the shared preferences, and then from within shared preferences you get the values by asking get string, and then you use that to connect it with it. But let's think about this. we're gonna do something like this, and you're gonna have a chance to do this. But I don't like doing it here. The reason why I don't like doing it here, it's every single time we're getting this object, every single time we're recreating a connection to Twitter, every single time we're doing a lot of this stuff. And you guys keep asking, like, what's a good way to kind of share or data or exchange data across various parts, right? So there is something like that, and I didn't do this before, but because I wasn't aware of it, but now I am. So there's a way to kind of refactor this in such a way that we keep it more central to our application. So there's actually something called an application object, okay, which is an object that is easily accessible to every part of your app. And if you look at our picture, back to our big picture, yes, status activity needs connection to Twitter, but so does the update service. It also needs connection to Twitter. So wouldn't it be better to have all this as opposed to copy paste it, you know, have it all centralized in some place that is easily accessible to
The
everyone?
whole Twitter object itself, you're saying, not just user and password.
Exactly, the entire Twitter object.
A singleton?
It is a singleton, but it is a singleton. It's going to be called application object. Yeah, and we're going to get it. We're going to be easily. It's going to be easily available to us by saying get application object.
This is Android specific.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something that's specific to Android. And as a matter of fact, when you look at and there's some more stuff that we're going to want to do in this, but when you look at the manifest file, there's actually a way to specify how this is represented, how the application is represented in Java. So there is a Java representation for application. We just haven't had the opportunity to do it, but that's where the name comes from. Let's see what this says. So you can put a name of a Java class that goes in there. Does that make sense?
Where would I see that in that manifest?
Yeah. So in the manifest file, we're gonna say this is gonna be our app implementation. So we can put the common stuff in that thing. That's a singleton. Right?
So in which attribute? The application attribute?
Yeah. So we're gonna do this step by step. So let's do this together. So let's go into our package. So it's going to be a Java class. So just like any other Java class, let me close this couple of things. Just like any other Java class, what we're going to do is we're going to go and right-click on it and say New Class. So we're creating a new class, and I'm going to call it Yamba application. So it's going to be an application object. Okay. And just like any other thing that we do in Android, you start by subclassing something from the system, right? So extends application and then organize imports, and that figures it out, right? So now this is a good place to put stuff that we want to share across multiple parts of our system, right?
Can you repeat once more?
So what I've done so far is I created a new class, right? So I want to create a new class to represent an application. So just like we did with preference activity, status activity, whenever you create a new class, you right-click on your package, and you go New Class, right? And that just brings up the little dialog, and you just give it a name. And I called mine Yamba application, and hit enter, right? And that gives you a blank. That gives you a blank file, right? Like that, right? And then what I said is, okay, whenever we subclass, whenever we write something in Android, you usually start by subclassing the system component. So you start at the higher level, right? So we first inherit extends application. So we inherit everything from the application object. Only then we start doing some work, right? And if you weren't sure what you can do in here, you could go source, override, implement methods, and we can do on configuration change, on create, on low memory, on terminate, etc., etc. Right? See, there's certain things we can do when the application is created as a whole. Right? That may not be a bad thing. You know, maybe we want to do certain things when the application is created as a whole. Okay, I'll implement that one. Bam. So this is going to get called when an app is created. Remember, app is created whenever one of the main building blocks is needed, right? So it just like remember, like a web. I said compare an application to a website. You may have a website, and who says that a user is going to come through the main door? User can come through any web page, right? It doesn't have to be a main page. So similarly, in here, who says that they're going to start here? They are going to start here if they click on the launcher. But what if something else dumped them into, for example, read the timeline activity right away? So this could be an entry point.
Or I guess, because the process doesn't get killed.
Exactly.
Go away, come back, and end up in the same place.
Exactly. So application is going to get created whenever one of these guys is needed. Right? So this basically gets created first on create. And that's a good place to do some stuff that's going to be specific to everything.
So any of those pages getting launched directly calls this on create as a callback to the
Yeah, the system basically says, okay, we need to launch a Linux process and an application, application.
So anything of type application is going to just call it on create when any of the corresponding activities are involved?
Well, only first time when the application is needed.
Okay. No, so my question is, did I say, okay, these activities need this application, or all applications in the project should on create? Oh, your XML file, you're going to define that?
Yeah, so your manifest file says, look, we have one application, and currently it consists one application and currently consists of 2 activities. So any of this activity, if it started, application has been started for all of them.
So, but if I wanted an object just for one activity, I would put it inside this XML inside the activity?
If you wanted an object just for one activity?
Or maybe 2 activities, and I don't want the third activity to access it.
Well, then you would have to do some business logic around that. But in this case, yeah, it's kind of like all the citizens of application have equal access to application object. You can boot somebody out or then do special stuff, but as long as they're within the this application called Yamba application, then they have access to it. So one thing that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to define this shared preferences here, prefs, and I'll define Twitter object here, Twitter, and I'm going to import them.
What was your shortcut key to import?
Control-Shift-O. So, if you're not sure, it's under source.
No, I did that, but then I'm like, this is easy. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Control-Shift-O. So, yeah. I use Control-Shift-O and Control-Shift-F a lot. F is to format, right? So if you have like things like messed up, like formatting is all like screwed up and whatever, right? Like that, you just do Control-Shift-F and just fix it. Yeah. So far, so good? Yeah? Okay, so now that we have I could do those things that I did again. So, I typed it kind of quickly here, but now we're going to do it together. So, I'm going to say prefs is preference manager dot get default share preferences for application context. Let me see if I can just say this, because I think this may also. You can also say this, because application is a subclass of context. Okay? So you can just say this as well. right? Because application is a context, right? You know what I mean by is a? Is a has a. Cool. So now we have our prefs, right? Preferences. Now, what I typically do is, are you guys familiar with lazily initializing something?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I typically would do is, as opposed to defining Twitter, I would make this even private, right? So people can't access Twitter directly. Okay. But I would provide a method. So I would provide a public Twitter get Twitter. So if you want Twitter, you say get Twitter, right? And then in here we can say if Twitter is null, then we're gonna create it, right? Else we're just gonna return it. Make sense? So that's lazily initializing. We're saying you can't access this guy directly, but once you can say get Twitter, and then if it already exists. In other words, it's not null, we just return it. But if it doesn't, we're going to get it created. That's lazily initializing that, right? And that's a good strategy because you don't want to do all this upfront work, right? Because, see, the user starts up this application, starts up this activity. There's a lot of upfront work to do as is, to draw the UI and all that. By the time they clicks this, that's like 15, 20, 30 seconds later. So why not worry about that, crossing that bridge when you get to it, right? So it's smart to kind of put that on a back end of the job, right? So I would say, okay, if Twitter is null, which first time around it's gonna be, right? So I can even make sure that it's null, right? First time it's gonna be, then we're gonna create a Twitter, but we're gonna need string username, right? And we're gonna need password, right? So in server, so username is going to be prefs.getString for the key, and key was username. The default value could be blank. Then you do the same for string password. It's prefs.getString password, and then you do the same for server. Right, and then we do Twitter is new Twitter, username, password, and Twitter dot set API string to server. Oops. So in other words, by the way, do you guys know what Java doc is? Right? So, you can just do this. Like, if you want to properly document this, let me show you. So we'll do column like this, right? Press enter, and Eclipse figures out that this returns something, and you now get to explain what the return is, right? So I would say return is connection to Twitter object, or object representing representing action to on service. If you want to fully document it, right? And I can say, lazily initial. Something like that, right? If I wanted to document stuff properly. So, in other words, you guys get the concept of a lazy initialization. So, first time around, Twitter is null, we do the job. But from there on, it's not null, so we're just going to keep returning the same guy, right? So far, so good. Is everyone follows this? We're kind of like refactoring a little bit. We're pushing some of the functionality that we already had in here, right?
Do you need to synchronize it? Or-
You mean the entire method?
Yeah.
You could.
Does the framework take care of that first?
But it's a read-only, so it's not really a big deal. Yeah, I mean, you can specify that it's synchronized, but I'll have to think about that. I don't think it's necessary. If I was updating something, I would worry about it.
You might initialize it twice, right?
Hmm?
You might initialize it.
That's possible, yeah. I could say public synchronized Twitter. Just in case that I have both service and in the status activity at the same time hitting this, and like maybe one is at like lined here and the other one is by that time lined here, and they're both like overriding the Twitter, but you know, in reality wouldn't really do much. They would just double initialize it, but likely to the same value. Yeah. Okay, so now that we have this, then back in here, I can, as opposed to doing all this stuff, you know, Twitter, blah, 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 right? I'm gonna delete all that. I just need Twitter, right?
What was the set status that we did?
Set status is the actual call that
Oh,
updates,
okay.
yeah. So that I need, but I need the Twitter. So I now need to say status activity dot get this dot get application dot get.
Maybe I cast it.
Yeah, I need to cast it to Yamba application. It's a little bit of a ugly spaghetti code, right? Dot get Twitter dot.
So can you access the application without the status activity by some other class?
Yeah, you can. It's and this is just because we're inside of a instead of an inner class, right? But yes, we're going to be accessing Yamba app from here. If I wanted to clean this up just to make it a little cleaner, I could have done Yamba application is this, right? So this is the Yamba application. Is it cleaner really? And then format app.get Twitter, right? I don't know. This is easier to read that way. Maybe we should have named Yamba app application to Yamba app. I don't know. Save a little bit of typing.
So I already have a problem with Eclipse where if I create something, even though I save it, and I go back and reference it, it doesn't know about it. What's an easy way to refresh it? So it's like, whether it's my R's or whether it's my Java files. And I'm trying to reference it, it's like, yeah, I don't know.
Let me take a look. Okay, so we have yeah.
Sorry, static activity on the Twitter.
Hold on. On click. Sorry, no, it's on. Yeah. So I can do app get Twitter, right? This is the status that's passed to it, right? So that's going to be the status that we're updating, the piece of text.
Somehow I get an error. I cannot pass the
Okay, let me take a look. Hold on. So that's gonna start that. That's basically gives you the access to the Yamba app, and then we do get Twitter. So is that everyone? Did you guys get that?
No, it's still floating down.
Still.
Can you just run it and see if you let's see what you need.
So if I run it and I say hello, testing refactoring, click on update. So please wait. Bam. Oh, it crashed. That's what you're talking about, right? Okay.
That line actually.
Okay. So let's see. Class cast exception. So class cast exception post to Twitter line 108. So that's where. So we know it's something failed casting line 108. So let's take a look. So post to Twitter line 108. Bam. So it's this line. Okay. So status activity dot get this. Aha. Right. So this fails. Right? Any ideas why?
Maybe it doesn't know which class. I mean, we just create this class, we didn't register it in any way to set.
Exactly. We just came up with this class. I could have called it Bobby or Mickey or Tommy activity.
Put it at XML.
Right. I mean, how do we tell our app, hey, this represents you, right? So, like you guys said, it's the XML file. So somewhere here, we need to define it. So it's probably going to be within the application context. So let me see if I can, is there something called application? Let me see if I can do control space. And it doesn't, I don't see it in this way. But I'm going to do it like this. So if I do a name and I say .yamba application, save it, that should now, so I went into the application. Yeah, application name, right? You could have clicked on browse as well, or you could have just went here and it's actually, okay, so this is the property application name, so as part of the application. So I could have done it that way. So now it knows that the application that represents this application is a class called Yamba application. So when you do get application, you're going to get application as opposed to the default application, and that's why the cast failed. So if I run this again, let's see what we get. Testing after refactoring. Update. Waiting. Status updated successfully. Ooh, bam. Worked. By the way, one thing I just remembered, we should probably, even if it fail to update, we should also cancel the status, right? Well, but actually that's going to happen because it's going to call on post. Never mind. You're spelling. Okay, let me take a look. So this library is designed to work with Twitter.com. So unless we actually go out of our way and say set the server and change the API of the server to point somewhere else, the library that implements Twitter by default uses Twitter.com. So what we need, and remember, if you did not put the server value, it's going to apply empty, which basically is not going to change it from Twitter.com. So what you need to make sure is that you go into your preferences and that you set server to this, learning Android.status.net/API. And the username and password, here, I'll just dump it on the screen because we can easily see it all right here, right? Bang.
Mine was actually set to that URL.
It was? But maybe you're not reading it and setting it.
No, I was.
Then why is it? That's weird. Let me take a look. Yeah, learning Android or status.net.
The server tab should work, right?
So let's talk about debugging. Okay. So a lot of you, you have. There's not you. Your code has issues here, right? We're not sure why it's connecting to Twitter or to a wrong server or why it's failing, this and that. So you have two choices. You can fire up the debugger. There's a full-on fledged debugger. So let me show you that. Now I'm not a big fan of that just because it's extremely slow and bloated. But for example, I could put a breakpoint here, right? And I could now say run this in a debug mode. So I click on the little debug. You guys know how debuggers work, right? It's pretty standard, right? So now this is starting in a debugger. So it's so debugging, blah blah blah. Click on update. So this is now gonna start my debugger. See in Eclipse, bam, right? So now it's stopped at that point, and I can actually evaluate here that password, username, and server are what I expected. There's the value, PSS, blah, 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 right? So that's one way, okay? And now if you're happy with that, you can continue or do whatever. Oh, sorry. You can say continue, or you can detach, and so on. I'm going to disconnect. Now, I don't like the debugger because it's like so bloated, so slow. It just adds friction to my development. Here's what I personally would do. I would remove that breakpoint. And I would use logcat. And I would say, I would say log.d tag, comma, and I would say string.format, and I would put some kind of format, getting Twitter with, and then %s at %s, for example, right? And then I would say username, password, server, right? Bam. Okay. Now organize imports. Remember, you got to import the proper log, so it's going to be the first one. Now, what the heck is tag? I and a lot of other people tend to define tag for the class, right? So that you have a constant called tag. That's your tag. You can type in something here. You can call it Mickey if that's how you want to tag stuff. But usually what I do is I create something called private static final string tag as a constant, right? And you can make it whatever you want. Not a bad name is the name of your application, right? Okay. Or some people are gonna do, as opposed to, I copy. Yeah, exactly. You could do something like this. You could do Yamba application dot get class dot get simple name, right? If you want, right? So if you change the name of the application, you don't have to remember to change it. So that would be the most proper way of doing it. And so now if I run it and I'm now testing it without the debugger, testing with logd, update, update successfully. But more importantly, if I look at my log, there should be a, getting Twitter. So there it is, learning Android, pass 2010 at HTTP, blah blah blah, right? So that's my preference. That's how I like to do it using the logcat. And I sprinkle my code with these logcats all over. And then you can easily just things crash. You have a log to look at. You know what's going on and so on.
Does Android log support I don't know, Apache log? You can set this file that tells you to set the level how much you. So even if you leave it in your code, you can.
Yeah, there's something called Can you set the level and all that? There's some support here in Yamba. and if you go under application, you can basically set debuggable or true or false, test only, and so on. But there's some changes with this particular thing that I kind of scanned in Gingerbread. So I haven't really quite read up on that yet.
Okay.
But there's some changes in how this by default now works. So just FYI.
Okay, so it might change it from a true false to more like a level now.
Yeah.
Should be
Exactly. Yeah.
So log.d, I'm not setting any level here, right?
Yeah, you're not. So log.d is the level.
Is debug.
E would be error, I would be info, and
And
so
what
on.
is the, so when it's running normally, right now it's d is the level. What is the level that it's running at? What is the default level that it's set at my error that my message shows up?
No, whatever you set here, whatever you specify as the level is the level. So if you say I'm logging at a debug level,
Correct.
if I say error, then it would be error and so on.
Oh, like that. So the debug level messages are always going to get logged.
Exactly. It's always going to get logged, but then you get to filter how much information you want.
Correct. So this is only filtering. It's not going to turn off that log. So if
Yeah.
I had like.
Yeah, well, but you can turn it off. There's a way to basically surpass some of those logging.
So you get a part because I found first it works, and then I put a wrong UR. It still works because the Twitter only set the API root UR when you create it. So after that, if you update the UR, it will not appear them.
Right. So that's exactly that's a good point. So we skipped the break. Do you guys want to take a short break and then we're gonna continue? Okay. But that's exactly, you pointed out something that's missing. So we're not quite done yet. So let's take a short break and then we'll wrap it up. So let me point that out. So look. So you guys saw this worked, right? Like if I go now to learningandroidstatus.net, open it up, you are gonna see that there are messages there. That was mine from test log D, right? Now, if I go and change my password, or here I'm gonna change username to something wrong, 99, okay? Save it, go back.
It's still working.
Let's see. Does it still work? And it does. It's amazing. It even works with the wrong password. Can you do that? So the problem is that once we lazily initialize it, it stays there forever and ever. So we only do this once. But what happens when you have a password changes? How do we do that? We don't account for the fact that password may change. And keep in mind, this is in this case, how would you solve this? What would be your solution to this?
There would be an on update reference or something, then we call it back.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the poor man's solution would be like, let's move this every single time. Let's not do it lazily. So, right?
If I would like with the record command, so what happens only once, right? Only when with the record command.
Exactly. So what we need to do is we need to know when it's stale, when it changes. And you got it right. So yes, there's a way to provide a listener, right? So we're going to do that here in the Yamba application. It's a good place. So after I get preferences, I'm going to say prefs dot and is it register? Yeah, it's either set or register or something. So it's this hell of a long method name. Don't type it, just use the completion. Register on shared preference change listener. Phew. I mean, just in case you weren't sure what it does.
Exactly.
Right? So, and then it says what's the listener. So I'm gonna do that dense thing again. So I'll say this. Eclipse is gonna say this is not a listener. I'm gonna say let this be a listener, and then it's gonna add that thing on implements on shared listener, and then I'm gonna say add unimplemented methods. Bam, bam, bam. And then I have the method at the bottom. Right? So this is
selected cast argument this to on shared one, like when you update this one basically.
so I just said this, yeah. Meaning notify this when you change. Just like with the button, just like with multiple things we had so far, right? It's the same kind of concept, right? Well, we did this with a button. When we did this with, I don't know if we did it with something else, but we know it's the same. Yeah, we've done it multiple. I call it the little dance we do, right? So you say, let this be the listener. It says, well, it's not. You say, you put your mouse over it. You say, let Yamba application implement on share preference change listener. Bam, it adds it. And then it says, but it's still not a listener. Then you say, add unimplemented methods, and it adds that method. So what do I need to do when preferences change? Right, which I would do how? How about we just make existing Twitter object dirty? We can just say Twitter equals null. And the next time when it's needed, if it's ever needed again, it's gonna get new preferences, etc., etc. So we don't, we don't even care what changes. I can just invalidate Twitter. Right? That's what we're doing here. So called when preferences change. So I'm going to try the reverse. So I still have the wrong password. So testing on pref change. Listener. So if I click on update, this should fail. Bam, failed. Click on menu. I change my username back to regular, the correct one, right? And then I go back and I click on update, and now it should work, and I should verify it works. Yeah.
So it's funny, right? The password, when I'm typing it, it obfuscates it.
Yeah.
But then I try to edit it, showing it all in plain text.
When you what?
When I'm trying to edit it. Shouldn't it?
Well,
It shows the whole
Yeah.
when you edit it, so when if I go menu and then preferences and then password.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Mine doesn't.
Maybe I don't have that from attribute.
So the reason why it shows one way or the other is the that not well known property on preferences that says password equals yes. So so basically the reason why it shows as a password is by saying not yes but true.
Where is that again?
So in preferences where we define what a
Let me actually write
So now mine should pass, right? Because the username was.
I'm sorry, what? So to make password hidden, we just basically specify Android password equal true on the password property in preferences.
It doesn't even show up in Eclipse, so Android.
Yeah, it's not well. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't work in Eclipse. Okay, so we're now done with preferences, right? So we now have a. So what we've done. So let's just kind of review. So what we've done so far is we have this. Okay, this works. It posts here. It does it on a separate thread. It does it properly. And all that. We have preferences which can update all the information, stores it in a file. This guy is reading this via the application, Yamba application object. So we have all this done. We're pretty much, we're done with, 1 and 2, right?